October 14th, 1960, Memphis, Tennessee. The grocery store was quiet at this hour. Late Friday afternoon, the kind of hour when most people were already home, already thinking about the weekend, already past the point of wanting to stand in line behind strangers. A handful of shoppers moved through the aisles. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, the October air had turned cool and sharp. Elvis Presley was in the cereal aisle, wearing jeans and a plain shirt, carrying a basket with a few basics. Milk, bread, sandwich meat, nothing that required deliberation. He had been coming to this store since before anyone outside Memphis knew his name, and the staff had an unspoken agreement with him that here, in these aisles, he was simply a regular customer. Dorothy, the cashier who had worked the evening shift for 15 years, had rung up his groceries dozens of times. She nodded hello, asked about the weather, moved on. Nobody made a production of it. Elvis didn't need a disguise here. He just needed a grocery store. He was almost done when he noticed the old man. The man moved slowly through the aisle ahead of him, leaning on a single cane. His left pant leg was pinned up at the knee, the fabric folded and secured with the particular neatness of someone who had been doing that for years and had made his peace with it. His shirt was old but clean, ironed, the kind of care a man takes with clothes when he doesn't have many. On his chest, a small pin, the kind veterans wore. Elvis couldn't read the details from where he stood, but he recognized what it meant. He had just come back from 2 years of his own military service, nothing like what that pin represented, but enough to give him a sense of what the uniform asked of the people who wore it. He continued shopping, but he kept noticing the old man. In every aisle, the same pattern. The man would pick up an item, turn it over, look at the price, and make a decision. Sometimes the item went into the basket. More often it went back on the shelf. There was nothing random about it. It was methodical, careful, the movement of someone who knew exactly what he could afford and was working the numbers in real time with everything he touched. Elvis finished his shopping and headed to the only open checkout lane. The old man was already there, unloading his basket onto the counter. "Evening, Mr. Peterson. How are you today?" Dorothy's voice was warm, familiar. She knew this man. "Can't complain, Dorothy. Body's not what it used to be, but I'm still here." That's the spirit. Elvis watched as the items moved across the counter. A loaf of bread, a small container of milk, 2 cans of soup, a package of butter, eggs. The kind of order that tells you everything about a person's circumstances. Nothing for pleasure, nothing extra, just the architecture of survival. "That'll be $4.35, Mr. Peterson." The old man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small change purse, the kind that snaps closed. He opened it and began counting coins onto the counter. Pennies first, arranged in small, neat piles. Then nickels, then dimes. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, age, or the particular anxiety of a man who has done this math already and is hoping the answer comes out differently this time. Dorothy waited. She had seen this before. Elvis could tell from the way she stood, patient, unhurried, her face arranged into an expression of perfect normalcy, as if a customer counting pennies at her register was the most ordinary thing in the world. Because for her, it was. For Mr. Peterson, it probably was too. The old man's lips moved as he added up the columns. 380, 390. $4, $4.10, $4.15, $4.20. He stopped, recounted, turned the change purse inside out, pressed the lining with his thumb to make sure nothing was caught in the seam. Empty. "I'm 15 cents short," he said quietly. "Don't worry about it," Dorothy said. "No." The word came quickly, with a firmness that hadn't been in his voice before. "I don't take charity. I'll put something back." He looked at his small pile of items on the counter. His hand hovered over the eggs, moved to one of the soup cans. Settled there. "I don't need 2 cans. 1 will be enough." Elvis had been watching all of it. The pin on the man's chest, the pinned pant leg, the methodical calculation through every aisle, the pride in his voice when he said he didn't take charity. And now, the quiet resignation with which he reached for the soup can. Not anger, not bitterness, just the practiced acceptance of a man who had long ago learned to want only what he could actually have. Elvis reached forward and touched Dorothy's arm gently. When she looked at him, he shook his head and mouthed 2 words. "I'll pay." Dorothy's eyes widened slightly. She was professional enough not to react beyond that. "Actually, Mr. Peterson," Dorothy said, turning back to the old man, "I just remembered, we have a special on soup today. Buy 1, get 1 free. So this second can doesn't count." Mr. Peterson looked at her with the measured suspicion of a man who had lived long enough to know that things rarely work in his favor without explanation. "Since when?" "Just started," Dorothy said, holding his gaze steadily. "So you've got 15 cents credit. You want to pick something else? Maybe some coffee? I know you like coffee." The old man's face shifted, confusion moving toward something more fragile. "You sure about that sale?" "Positive." A pause. Then his shoulders settled slightly, the particular physical release of a man who had been bracing against something and just felt the pressure ease. "Well, if there's a sale, haven't had coffee in weeks, I suppose I could use some." "You go get yourself some. I'll wait right here." Mr. Peterson made his way back into the store, his cane tapping steadily against the linoleum. The moment he turned the corner, Elvis stepped forward. "How much for all of it, including the coffee?" "With the coffee, probably around $5, Dorothy said quietly. Elvis opened his wallet and placed a 20 on the counter. "Ring up my things separate. Give him his groceries and whatever change is left from the 20. Tell him you miscalculated, or the sale was better than you thought. Whatever makes sense. And Dorothy, fill his basket. Whatever a man needs for a week of decent meals. Add it to my bill." Dorothy looked at him. "You're a good man, Elvis Presley." "He's the good man," Elvis said. "He served this country. He left part of himself on a battlefield so people like us could live the way we do. This is nothing compared to what he gave." Mr. Peterson came back with a small can of coffee and set it on the counter. Dorothy added it to the bag, made a show of recalculating, announced the total was actually $4.20, with all the sales accounted for, and pressed 3 nickels into the old man's palm. Mr. Peterson looked at the coins, looked at his bag, looked at Dorothy. "You sure you got that right?" "Absolutely sure." A long moment. Then something that might have been relief or gratitude, or simply the exhausted acceptance of a small piece of unexpected good fortune. "I appreciate it, Dorothy. You have yourself a good evening." You too, Mr. Peterson. You take care now. The old man picked up his bag and moved toward the door. He was almost out when Elvis spoke. "Excuse me, sir." Mr. Peterson turned, saw Elvis for the first time. His eyes registered recognition, then something more careful. The assessment of a man deciding how to respond to being noticed by someone famous. Elvis walked over to him. "I couldn't help noticing your pin. You served in World War II. The old man straightened. "Not much. The cane and the missing leg put limits on how straight a man could stand, but enough to show what the question meant to him. "European theater," he said. "Lost my leg at Normandy, but I made it home, which is more than a lot of men can say. Thank you for your service." 3 words, said by thousands of people every day, often as reflex, as social lubricant, as the path of least resistance when confronted with someone who has earned something you cannot repay. But Elvis said them the way a person says something they have actually thought about, with weight behind them, with the specific gravity of someone who means it. Mr. Peterson's eyes went bright. "That's kind of you, son. I know who you are. My granddaughter has your records. She thinks you're something special. I'm just a singer. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero." The old man shook his head. "I just did what needed doing." "We all did." "That's exactly what makes you one," Elvis said. "Doing what needs doing, even when it costs you something." The old man looked down at the place where his leg ended, then back up at Elvis. "Cost a lot of us something. But we were fighting for something worth fighting for." "I was in the army," Elvis said, "just finished, 2 years in Germany. Nothing like what you went through. But it gave me some understanding of what service means, what it asks of a person." Mr. Peterson looked at him differently then. "Then you know," he said simply. "I'm trying to," Elvis said, "though I think I've got a long way to go before I measure up to men like you." They talked for a few more minutes. 2 men who had worn the uniform, finding the particular common ground that experience creates between people who would otherwise have nothing obvious to share. Then Mr. Peterson said he needed to get home before his groceries got warm. Elvis held the door open for him and watched the old man make his way out into the October evening, his cane tapping against the sidewalk, his bag of groceries in his free hand. Elvis went back to the register. Dorothy had already started ringing up his items, but the basket on the counter contained things he hadn't picked out. Packages of meat, vegetables, extra bread, more soup, coffee. The ingredients of a week's worth of real meals, not survival rations. "Mr. Peterson forgot a few things," Dorothy said, not looking up from the register. "I'm sure he'll be back for them tomorrow. Maybe you could drop them off on your way home. You live in that direction, don't you?" Elvis understood immediately. "I'd be happy to. Can't have a man go without his groceries." The total came to considerably more than the few basics Elvis had originally planned to buy. He paid without hesitation, picked up 2 full bags, and headed for the door. Dorothy called after him. "You know, I've been working retail for 15 years. Seen all kinds of people. Rich, poor, famous, regular. And in all that time, I've learned one thing. What makes a person good has nothing to do with how much money they have or how many people know their name. It's what they do when nobody's watching." Elvis paused at the door. "Except you were watching." "Maybe so," Dorothy said. But you didn't know that when you made the decision. You did it because it was right. Not because anyone would see. Elvis smiled slightly, nodded, and walked out into the October evening. Dorothy turned to the next customer in line, a woman who had been standing there for the last several minutes, who had watched the entire exchange from 3 feet away, the coin counting, the fake soup sale, the conversation at the door, all of it. The woman had tears running down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know I'm standing here crying like a fool. But what I just saw, that was the most beautiful thing I've witnessed in a very long time." "It was pretty special," Dorothy agreed. The woman opened her purse and took out a $5 bill. "I want to put this toward Mr. Peterson's groceries. Next time he comes in. If that young man can do what he just did, the least I can do is something." A man who had been standing further back in line stepped forward. "Put me down for 5 as well." Then someone else. Then another. By the time the store closed that Friday night, Dorothy had collected nearly $50 from customers who had witnessed Elvis's quiet act and felt something move in them that they needed to respond to. Some of them had seen the whole thing. Some had only caught fragments, a glimpse of the coin counting, a few words of the conversation at the door. But it had been enough. Dorothy took the money and started a fund. Not just for Mr. Peterson, but for a small group of regulars she had noticed over the years. People who came in with careful budgets and careful eyes, who put things back, who counted what they had before they got to the register so they wouldn't be caught short at the counter. People who had been surviving quietly in the background of the store for years, while nobody particularly noticed. Elvis never knew about the fund. He never knew that what he had done in those 20 minutes had rippled outward through a grocery store on a Friday evening and moved strangers to open their wallets for people they had never spoken to. He never knew that Dorothy thought about that evening for years, that she told the story to people who told it to other people, that it traveled through the neighborhood not as gossip, but as something closer to testimony. He didn't know because he never told anyone it had happened. When reporters asked Elvis about his charitable work, and they did, regularly, because the donations to hospitals and schools and children's organizations were well documented, he talked about those. The official acts, the ones with receipts and ribbons and photographs. He never mentioned the grocery store, not once, not the 15 cents, not Dorothy's fiction about the soup sale, not the 2 bags of food he dropped on Mr. Peterson's porch on his way home that evening, leaving them without knocking, without waiting to be seen, without needing the old man to know where they came from. The people who had been in that store that evening told their families. Their families told others. The story moved quietly through the neighborhood for years, not amplified by the press, not attached to any official record, just passed between people who thought it was worth passing on. Mr. Peterson never learned the truth. He went home that Friday believing in the soup sale, believing in Dorothy's arithmetic, believing that a small piece of good luck had found him at the end of a difficult week. He didn't know that the man behind him in line had quietly made a decision the moment he saw an old veteran counting pennies on a counter. And perhaps that was the most significant part of what Elvis did. Not the money, the $20, the extra bags, the week of decent meals. Those mattered, but they were resources, and Elvis had resources in abundance by October 1960. What required something more than resources was the decision about how to give. He could have stepped forward directly, could have reached past Mr. Peterson and handed Dorothy cash in plain sight, could have said something that would have made the moment visible, memorable, the kind of story the old man would have told his granddaughter. I met Elvis Presley at the grocery store, and he paid for my food. Instead, he chose the fiction. The soup sale, the miscalculation, the 3 nickels pressed into Mr. Peterson's palm by a cashier who was very sure she had counted correctly. He chose to let the old veteran walk out of that store believing he had managed on his own, because a man who had left part of himself on a beach in Normandy had earned the right to his dignity more permanently than he had earned any other thing. And dignity cannot be handed to a person. It can only be preserved or taken. Elvis preserved it. He made sure that Mr. Peterson, who had said clearly and without hesitation that he didn't take charity, never had to. When Elvis died in August 1977, the stories came out, dozens of them, people who had witnessed something quiet, a moment in a parking lot, a conversation in a diner, a bill paid without announcement in the back of a store. Small acts, unrecorded, known only to the people who had been present. The grocery store story was one of them. Dorothy was interviewed once, years after Elvis's death, and asked why she thought he had done it. She didn't hesitate. He saw a man who had given everything for his country, a man who had literally left part of himself on a battlefield so people like Elvis could live the lives they lived. And Elvis understood something that a lot of people with money and fame don't understand. That no hit record, no movie contract, no amount of any of it could ever repay what that man had given. So he did what he could in that moment. He made sure a veteran could eat decent meals for a week. Not as charity, not for recognition, just as one human being honoring another. She paused, and he let the man keep his pride. That was the part that stayed with me. Anyone can write a check. It takes something else to make sure the person receiving it never feels like they received anything. There is a particular kind of generosity that does not announce itself. It does not calculate what it will receive in return, not gratitude, not recognition, not even the private satisfaction of being seen as a good person, because it operates in the spaces where no one is watching. It moves quietly, covers its tracks, hands back dignity along with whatever else it gives, and then walks out the door without waiting to see what happens next. Elvis Presley was 25 years old that October evening, famous beyond anything most people will ever experience, wealthy in a way that made 15 cents a rounding error so small it didn't register. None of that is what the story is about. The story is about a young man who stood in a line and watched an old veteran count pennies and understood, without deliberation, without needing to think it through, what the right thing was, and then did it in the way that required the most from him, not the easiest way or the most visible way, but the way that gave Mr. Peterson back something that poverty had been slowly taking from him, his sense that the world still had a place for him in it, that a man who had served and sacrificed and survived was still worth something, not as a symbol, not as a story to tell, as a person, as someone who deserved coffee and 2 cans of soup and eggs and the small, ordinary dignity of believing he had paid his own way.